Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm going to move my preview over here so I'm not seeing it. It's kind of distracting and in my last video, which I hope you had seen, I made earlier today and I uploaded today, of course. I tried this technique out of hiding my preview so I'm not watching myself while I'm not watching my face while I'm recording. All right. So earlier today, I was watching a YouTube video on a channel, um, and he actually showed this. He was showing another person's video, hopefully in its entirety, because as he said, this video was very quickly privatized, uh, perhaps under pressure. But fortunately, he was able to show this video. It was about a celebrity that I respect and I follow somewhat. I liked his work. He was talking about the fact that in the past month he had been in basically I'll be careful just in case anybody knows who I'm talking about. He describes himself as um, having had a break with reality. So he talks quite a bit in the video about, and he's very open and honest. He's talking about how it really saved his life being in there, and I would imagine he would describe it as some time away from these obligations in life, and he certainly expressed that it gave him time to reflect on himself that he had neglected for a long time. That's what inspired me to do this video. Not necessarily the particular circumstances that got him in there, but focusing and the importance of focusing on your own self. Um, for him, he described a childhood incident that at the age of 6. I mean, that's part of my project. I can't remember back to age 6. I suspect possibly because there were so many things happening in my mom's life with my dad that perhaps it was so chaotic that I blocked it out of my mind. Um, the earliest memories I have are 1982, something like that. I remember more vividly being in Winnipeg for a year, and that's when I had my that's when I attended my first grade of school, and then I moved from Winnipeg with my mom. I hadn't lived with my dad. I moved back into the United States and settled somewhere. All my earlier videos are privatized at this point, so I'm being even more vague about personal details of my life. Suffice it to say that I I can't remember anything much before being in Winnipeg. I wanted to just explore what my thoughts were like, more specifically, what interests I had, and explore what that inspired in me at a young age. Because obviously, I know that I was interested in UFOs later on, and I know I was interested in, well, various things and behaved in certain ways, and certain things attracted my attention, and certain ideas were constantly roaming through my head. So I wanted to explore in this video what possibly inspired those things. Now, this guy that I was talking about who made the video talked about a negatively and very traumatic thing that happened to him that provoked him to be more of a comedian, perhaps to um, hide or defend himself from being attacked again. He talks about having been fat as a child and it really, really bothered him. He talks about moments when people made remarks to him, right at him, and it caused a negative self image in him. So he became a comedian and he used that in order to uh, call attention to those things, the fatness, so that it wouldn't be as much of an impact when other people, he was taking power away from other people. So I don't necessarily want to do that. I'm simply curious about what inspired me at a young age to, for example, go into these interests like television and being very imaginative and creative. So let's start with where I was mentally in Winnipeg. And then to contrast that, I want to talk about the move after that back to the United States and growing up with my mom in uh, in a state that I won't mention. Now, it's very clear, the distinction is very clear because I remember Winnipeg very clearly, and then I remember when I grew up in this these the series of physical relocations afterwards. Um, so I remember watching movies on television, so I was very curious, and I have to speak in terms of not knowing anything about my future. At the time, I remember enjoying The Muppet Show. I remember enjoying I Dream of Jeannie, and I remember enjoying The Sound of Music one time when it was on TV, and I think I had a chance to watch one of the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, the first one and perhaps the other ones. And that's shortly after the movies had been out in the theaters. So, so right off the bat, I must have been attracted to Superman, of course, being able to fly. And I remember him being one of my first, if not my very first, hero, so to speak. I remember having a dream, and I remember talking to my mom about having a dream where I flew up in the sky, and I remember looking down over the trees or whatever would have been on the ground. And he had the Christopher Reeve Superman movies portrayed Clark Kent as somebody very caring and very considerate and at the same time smart and powerful with extraordinary abilities that he used for good. I remember I Dream of Jeannie, and I remember Jeannie being in her bottle sometimes, and I remember being in my bedroom, and I had this large bedroom all to myself, and imagining that I would be like Genie in a bottle. Not that I was closed up, but it was an amazing feat of magic because if you've seen the show, they had a whole set built to look like the inside of her bottle, and she would get dressed sometimes, or she would do something or other in the bottle. And come to think of it, I also remember uh, dressing up in some time, and I mean, I don't think I dressed up that much. I think I just put on extra coats or something, whatever. Something about Mary Poppins, and I went over and introduced myself as Mary Poppins to my mom, just happenstance. So, and I don't think I was coming out or anything. I think it was simply that Mary Poppins, again, something magical, a movie that's magical and fanciful, um, must have been something that held a dear place in my heart. So I I guess my acting, my propensity for acting out what I saw on television was perhaps playing an early part. Not so much acting out physically. I don't think I acted out very physically, but it was very much a mental bonding that I had with these characters on TV. And I remember getting a Kermit doll, ordering a Kermit when the Muppet Show was on TV. And I also remember ice skating, and I remember the Looney Tunes cartoon being on TV, and I would miss it because I would be taking some ice skating lessons for a little bit. It's something my mom had me do, and I didn't really thrill me, which also I guess says something. Um, so as far as I can recall, it's the earliest I've been able to trace in terms of memories of watching a movie in a movie theater was uh, the third Star Wars movie, well, the third one released in the Star Wars trilogy, which was Return of the Jedi. And I really, really bonded with that. I had seen it several times in the movie theater, and my mom would accompany me. And I remember at one point, there's a moment when Jabba the Hutt reveals his favorite decoration hanging on the wall, which is Han Solo, and they were talking about Luke, or there was something about Luke Skywalker. And I asked my mom, "Is that Luke Skywalker up on the and as the decoration?" And she said, "No, no, no. I think that's Han Solo," which shows as a little kid how really little at some point I was. It's weird. I'm surprised I actually asked that, but I remember asking that. Um, and it's just weird that I would, because Luke Skywalker was also there interacting and talking with, I don't know, it's really weird. I guess I was a kid, a really early kid. So I was born in mid-November 1975, and the movie came out probably around May, which would be when these movies come out. The Star Wars movies came out traditionally in May, which is I think George Lucas's birthday of 1983. So I would not have reached November 1983 yet. Um, so it would have been 5 to make it November 1980, and then 7 to make it November. Was it November 1982? So I would have been 7 and some months old. Um, anyway, going back to the movie itself, I bonded very much with the movie. I'd seen it several times, and the movie portrays something very heroic. It's very noble. That Luke, spoiler alert, I guess, if you don't want to know the details, I'll just say a few sentences that he knows that his father is Darth Vader, and he tries to push his father out from the Darth Vader persona and really get in there and free his father mentally. So even at that age, I could identify. It was perhaps encouraging me to understand how it's really circumstances that cause people to or motivate people to do ugly things or things in certain ways. I don't think that people were born with sin or whatever. And by the way, I didn't necessarily grow up Jewish. I didn't know that I was Jewish at the time, but we, my mom and I, never talked about people's behavior, the way people are. Um, so I probably had this early from this movie and other movies, like Superman and so forth, this early understanding of people in the real world as having certain motivations and whether having a negative effect on people or not, or a positive effect on people or not. Whatever the case may be, they have certain motivations and certain reasons why they do the things that they do. and that must have had a big impact on me. I may have come to that conclusion already, but I'm saying that bonding so much with television and then with film probably egged it on, probably encouraged it. And so, let me see, that was 1983, and I don't think, as far as I traced back, I don't think I had seen another movie in a movie theater until 1984. And then that's basically when I settled more into longer life, where we had settled. We had settled into an apartment complex, and things settled in. I had settled into school, and I was going to second grade and third grade and the beginning of fourth grade. And at that point, you had a lot of movies coming out. I remember seeing, excuse me, I remember seeing Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom a few times. 1984. I hadn't seen Transformers yet. That would have been around October 1985. Let me see. Gremlins I saw a number of times. And Gremlins, I also saw Supergirl. Gremlins, I never really felt any negative reaction to. It was just to me, it was a fun movie. So I guess I don't really need to talk about that very much. So it was Temple of Doom, Gremlins, and Supergirl. Maybe I'm skipping something out by accident. Oh, I do remember seeing 2010, wanting to see 2010. I hadn't seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, although I think shortly after that, on TV, I would see 2001: A Space Odyssey. I didn't really care for it. I remember something about going with a kid on his bike through a trail around the woods near the the elementary school where we were, where we would attend school. I found that more interesting than 2001 on TV. There was another thing. There was 1984. The television was a big part of my life. And I could go on about that. I remember just simply being drawn towards some fanciful television shows like Benji. There was a show with Benji the Prince and some floating robot that hardly anybody probably remembers. And I remember other television shows. So you can see television being a part of my life. I knew that it was television. Oh, there was also, let me see, Star Trek. I had been a little familiar with Star Trek. Uh, um, 1984 would have been Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, and I watched that in the movie theater. And my mom tells me that I had seen Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, shortly afterwards on TV, and that a certain plot point at the beginning that ushers in Star Trek III was the conclusion after something big at the end of Star Trek II. So she said that when I later saw Star Trek II on TV, that huge ending in Star Trek II didn't faze me a lot. I don't know. That's what she said. And then shortly afterward, would have been that same year, 1984. A lot happened in 1984. I borrowed a film strip from the library, my very first Star Trek episode that I would see, which was borrowed with a film projector. It was The City on the Edge of Forever, and it would cut out a lot of times. So I don't think I even really was able to see the whole episode. But that was my first exposure to Star Trek. And I want to explore something else that was a huge part of my childhood and continued on through my teenage years. That is UFOs and the supernatural or the unexplained. a point of fact, when I say supernatural, I'm not referring to the TV show. Some people talk about it. When I say supernatural, they say, "Oh, you mean the TV show?" No, 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 no. I simply mean UFOs, ghosts, the Loch Ness monster, the Bermuda Triangle, etc., etc., etc. Well, I certainly remember that I was interested after we moved in 1980, the end of 1985, we moved to a different neighborhood, and at that point I was certainly interested in it. And some point soon afterwards, I discovered the TV series Bewitched, and I had already been familiar with the Salem witch trials, which fascinated me. Again, that element of magic and fanciful. Now, I want to not just gloss over this, I want to explore my thinking process and my mental take on these different things. I was attracted to what if, I was attracted to fantasy, I was attracted to the imagery that, witches could employ these magical powers. They could fly, they could just have these extraordinary abilities. And that links up with Superman having these extraordinary abilities. So I guess in general, a very significant aspect of my motivations and fascination was an attraction to extraordinary abilities and magical elements. And Star Trek also has some elements like that, and so does Star Wars. Incidentally, I don't remember when I saw A New Hope, which was the first Star Wars movie released, but I know that it was sometime after Return of the Jedi, and that there was a good period after seeing the first movie, A New Hope, until seeing The Empire Strikes Back. Empire Strikes Back had been for a long time that strange movie in between, with these characters that were sold as action figures by Kenner. I was familiar with the action figures, but I didn't know the context in which they were in because I'd never seen the movie. I have since seen the movie, of course, obviously. Uh, so, hmm. So UFOs. Again, UFOs. Same thing. When I would read these books, these adult-size research books. I mean, books by authors discussing. I keep saying UFOs because that was my primary interest, above ghosts, perhaps. Um, I remember in elementary school, in fourth and fifth grade, perhaps even sixth grade, I was borrowing books from the library and sometimes taking them to school and reading about them. This school itself had a library as well, but I would go to the local library, the village library, and take out books there, and they would have book sales, and that's how I acquired a lot of these adult books. And I was fascinated by those adult books. I was reading at an adult level as a child. So I was also interested in the Peanuts. I think the Peanuts was my favorite comic strip, and then soon afterwards I was interested in Dennis the Menace, and I had it's reading Sunday morning comic book. Reading, I'm not sorry, I'm not saying comic books. Reading Sunday morning comic strips in the paper was one of my favorite pastimes Sundays. So I suppose I must mention collecting toys. I must mention Transformers. And let's really get real. My bonding with other people. because of course that's a significant part of every person's lifetime. I don't remember. Let me see. In Winnipeg, I remember there was a kid that there was one kid I remember just simply because I would talk whenever I would come across words that rhymed. I would say, I'm going to put that in my rhyming book. Of course, I never had a rhyming book. I would just say that. But I remember this kid saying, "Oh, you should put these in your rhyming book." And then he mentioned some books. We were like walking down the street or something. I don't remember any significant friendships I had at that school. So that was in Winnipeg. That was first grade. And then we moved, and then I settled in. And at this point, I started watching, like, I seen the third Star Wars movie, and I met this kid on the school bus, and he became a close friend of mine. And I've talked about him in other videos. We both enjoyed Star Wars. We both enjoyed. He introduced me to Transformers, and the other kids had cable. I remember. I don't want to say the name of the place I lived in, or the name of the school, which is of course named after the area we lived in. So I'm trying hard not to do that. But I simply remember being in the school around 1984, and uh, keep in mind that I moved to another area in fall of 1985, so it's a short period of time. I don't remember being picked on. I don't remember being ostracized. I remember being with guys, boys play with boys and girls play with girls. I remember them enjoying Transformers and bringing their toys, many times Transformers, to school to show them off. And during recess, they would get together and they would show each other, this is Starscream, and they wouldn't actually say this is Starscream, but they all knew who these characters were. They would just marvel at them, and that's how I was with my toys. I never really played bang bang with my toys. I looked at them as works of art, and I always, I would always, I would just hold them in my hand, and I would look at the artwork, and the models, the detail, and I would look at, for example, a Kenner action figure. I would look at the head, I would look at the body, I would turn it around with my hands and just look at it like it's a model, literally a model. Same thing with Transformers. I would look at it as a work of art and transform it, and it got my brain thinking about how to transform one thing in terms of appearance into another thing. So I also remember them having cable and talking about watching Voltron, and having Nickelodeon and being able to watch You Can't Do That on Television. And I felt left out, as much although I wanted to understand and join in more in their conversations. I couldn't because I hadn't seen these shows. But there was no negativity towards me. um, I don't I don't remember any negativity towards me. um, I certainly remember an economic feeling that we don't have as much. I mean, my mom didn't have as much money, household money, as these other kids' parents did. And I remember uh, being a child of only one parent, and that the other kids had two parents typically. That was my impression. So I felt Uh, in my mind at the time, I simply felt I was okay with my mom and I was okay with my lifestyle at the time, but there was simply some disparity in terms of what other kids had. So when I switched schools, I moved and had to switch schools. That's when I think the ostracization came in and being picked on and made fun of. It's strange because I think there was some aspect of me in terms of I think I didn't like washing my hair really. So I didn't wash it enough. I didn't look like, frazzed out hair, but I didn't wash it enough. Um, would look greasy sometimes. So apparently, um, that was the only thing that carried over from this earlier place that I was talking about with the kids and so forth. So when I switched schools, of course, they noticed too. Um, but I remember them picking on me more. Uh, and I met a new friend, and we bonded as well. Although he wasn't as close, he like intellectually, he didn't seem as close as that first friend. I still kept in contact with that first friend. I'm veering off topic. I think I wanted to explore what motivations I had as a child and where they possibly came from. So I've talked about the supernatural and I've talked about television. Now, in fifth grade, I had since, I'd moved in fourth grade, and that was the fall of 1985, shortly when fourth grade began. And so in fifth grade, around December, January, the end of December and the beginning of January, that's when I discovered Star Trek. And so I was already primed for this fanciful kind of universe to explore. Now, I had gotten a number of books about Star Trek, so it was really escalating. As I started watching more Star Trek, especially when Fox 68 aired, started airing the TV series at like 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock weeknights. That's when I really gained a good awareness of Star Trek. I hadn't seen these episodes before; they were very fresh, and so while that's going on, I was able to borrow books from the library, and there was a Star Trek compendium that listed all the different episodes in production order and background uh, facts about the episodes and commentary and summaries and so forth. And I remember going through that, and that helped me enormously. There was an escalation. There was a fast-paced education on Star Trek. So I remember as a teenager in middle school, um, was I already primed to want to write for television? Because as a child, I remember like in 1984, um, I remember this is a silly thoughts of a kid. I remember what did I want to do when I grew up? Well, I wanted to pilot a starship. I figured by the time I'm an adult, which is like way, way, way like 60 years in the future or something, I mean, from the point of view of a kid, they would have advanced enough to have ships flying around. Maybe that's some effect of me having watched these movies, science fiction movies and fanciful movies. So at some point, I just began. Now I'm jumping ahead, of course, to like 1986. 1987, early 1987, when I began watching the Star Trek episodes. What was my initial reaction? Where was my mindset? Well, I don't think I was thinking professionally about them quite at that point, but I was I was simply learning tidbits about how they were produced. I had known I had I'd grown up a little bit watching television. Even when I was in Winnipeg, I knew that these were simply puppets. The Muppet Show. They were simply puppets, and I remember The Sound of Music and Mary Poppins and so forth. Even at that age, again, I would have been like 7 or 8. I I related to the movies and to the shows on TV as productions. I related to them as actors playing roles. And I think one of the first things, although I haven't really touched on this, it's kind of been assumed, but I should really say it out loud that even at that young age, I bonded with, like for example, the Muppet movie. I bonded with the emotional moments, what I would call the author's moments, the author message moments, like what's the moral of the story. I didn't have to be told what's the moral lesson of this movie. It was written in, and I believe that I benefited a lot from that time period, watching those movies growing up. For example, Superman has very strong moral themes and very positive reflections on, I don't want to say what you should and shouldn't do because that sounds too black and white. Reflections on the more nobler aspects of behavior. And the Muppet movie has a moment when Kermit questions, "Am I doing the right thing? And what have I done? Am I, he should have faith and should continue and so forth." There were these thoughts in these movies and TV shows, and I'm glad that I had the benefit of having grown up with stuff like that because I think that made a positive and very, not only positive, but constructive impression on me as a child. So I think that was one of the factors that steered me, one of the really significant factors that steered me towards wanting to write television shows. Now, I didn't think about writing movies at the time. I should also mention that in that period, of course, after moving from Winnipeg and settling in that early point in 1984, 1983, I still have these photographs. I have some memories of playing with a stick or whatever, pretending that it was a lightsaber. So I really bonded with Luke Skywalker as a character, and he was perhaps my second hero, my first being Superman. Um, and so, okay, so early 1987, I was learning about Star Trek, the Star Trek production, and I wasn't thinking of it in terms of career at the time. I was simply learning about how special effects were done. And this was a few years after they had these special effects specials or talk on TV. They had special featurettes on TV. Certain programs would have how is that done, for example, and they would talk about how certain special effects, practical special effects, were done. We didn't have CGI. So when you talked about special effects, obviously they were practical. You had to have models, you had to be real wizards and creative artists to be able to figure out how to create this live. I mean, like in real life. So I marveled at that, and I was curious, and that perhaps, now that I think about it, might tie in with my interest for a while in stage illusions. In fact, I would be surprised if it didn't. Uh, I could get into that later, but suffice it to say that there were some stage magic specials on TV that would air as a special event. You know, like an hour Doug Henning's magical performance, and David Copperfield would have special one night, um, special magic shows every now and then on TV. And so that combined with the special effects in TV, um, that guided me along. And let me see, I wrote a short script for Star Trek The Next Generation in probably somewhere when I was in seventh grade. So by that point, and I was introduced to Star Trek in fifth grade, the second half of fifth grade. So and Star Trek: The Next Generation premiered when I was in sixth grade. It was at the beginning of sixth grade. So let me see, sixth grade. Um, was I really interested in writing? I don't think I was necessarily interested in writing scripts. Uh, Certainly in elementary school in fifth grade, I would write short stories using Transformers characters. So I was already gearing towards writing. Was I interested in it? Excuse me, my back itches. Was I interested in a career in writing stories? I don't think so. And this is something I should actually tell myself. I don't tell myself this enough times. I wasn't interested in career plans. I was only like 10 or something at the time, maybe 11 or 12 or something at the time. I was simply doing what I enjoyed doing. There was no pressure. My mom never put career plan pressure on me. Um, Later on, of course, she, like, especially in middle school, that's when she said, you know, keep up those grades. Can you please keep up those grades, or improve your grades and so forth. I was never really interested in school. Um, I mean, in art class, of course, I enjoyed drawing and art in general, so that I saw as more like recess where I could just enjoy myself. Um, and of course, English class was just easier than some of the other classes like math or science, because I had a propensity. You may not notice with the stuttering there, but no, I had a propensity for speaking and for languages and for writing, expressing myself through writing. And of course, I was already reading adult level books. But aside from that, I didn't really have an interest in school. It was a means to an end. I just wanted to get through it and endure people making fun of me and just get it over with. So, uh, so I just did these things for fun. I would write stories. So it was probably, and that's essentially what I'm trying to do with this video, trying to figure out and explore what my earliest motivations came from. So I think I've done it pretty well. Uh, I I began writing in middle school, and then in high school I wrote some spec scripts, and I wanted to create television shows, and I know, I'm certain that Star Trek was the big influence on me. Um, I should also mention that back in like 1983, really 1984, 1983, I was in a different place. I was in Winnipeg, but 1984, I remember watching Alice, the sitcom, and I remember growing up with WKRP in Cincinnati. So I enjoyed those shows on a regular basis. Alf, that came like 1986. There were, I was glued to my TV night. I wasn't locked up, of course, but I mean, um, night after night, throughout the week, I would take out the schedule, the TV guide, that would come with the paper, and I just knew when my favorite shows were on TV. And I thought about those shows as um, not something that I should just sit and just blankly watch for a while. Mentally, I was interacting with them. Take Alf, for example. Um, as I would watch the puppet Alf, I would enjoy the storyline, I would enjoy his lines, I would enjoy it as a story being told with humorous jokes thrown in. And they weren't just jokes just thrown in, they were um, they were worked they were woven into the storyline. The storyline was made to be a funny premise. So I was understanding how to do funny premises. Not necessarily that I wanted to be a television series writer, but even at that point, but I simply was getting my first inklings of how stories are constructed. And so when was the moment when I wanted to go to Los Angeles? Well, I wanted to become a television series creator, perhaps around seventh grade, around middle school, because of Star Trek primarily. I knew that Gene Roddenberry had created this show, and I figured that I need to write television scripts. I was under the guided, the notion that in order to break in, you should write spec scripts to get attention, and then hopefully an agent, a literary agent, would represent you. And my mom helped me. This is primarily more high school, and that's what I was doing in high school in my off time, of course. Um, and that's when I had the more the career oriented notion that soon I would move to Los Angeles because that's where television was being made, and I didn't really have a notion about movies. Now, I had earlier today gathered up those scans of written material, stories, and scripts, and so forth, together into, I think it's 551 pages. It's not all text that I just created. I mean, these are scans of notes and scripts and stories and so forth. I put together into a book entitled My Story Work. Literally, that's the title. So I have it on my Amazon account ready to be uploaded. I've got the cover design. It's just some weird thing with processing. It just will not, just keeps encountering an error. So hopefully I can get this book published on Amazon in Kindle form so that you can download it. I'm thinking like $5 or $7. I mean, it's worth something. It's my own work, so it's something, and it's over quite a long period of time. I left out stuff that's other people's intellectual properties. In other words, I skipped out my Night Court scripts and Married with Children and so forth. And did I say Star Trek? Anyway, I left that part out because it's other people's shows, and I don't want to, in good conscience, or just for legal safety concerns, I didn't want to include them in something I'm selling. So it is a significant portion. It's like 551 pages. it's a significant chunk of my creative work, so I figured $5 to $7 is suitable. So anyway, that's what I was doing, and I think I ventured into other video topic territory. So I'll leave you with that, and I will see you next time. And also, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and especially like this video. I'm pleased that I am seeing that I'm getting some video likes, some video views. So at this point, I'm not being I'm being thankful for as many views as I am getting. I'm reaching some audience somewhere. So I'm glad that you enjoy it, and I'll talk with you next time. Bye.